Hello and welcome to this OECD webinar with me, Duncan Crawford, about the impact of digital devices in schools. Do smartphones and other digital devices help support learning in the classroom, or are they a distraction? There's already a big debate on this subject in many countries around the world, including right here in France, where the OECD is based, where a recent French government commissioned report recommended introducing age limits for kids using smartphones and social media apps. So what role, if any, should digital devices have in schools? Should smartphones, for example, even be banned? Well, the OECD has done a lot of work in this area, including in the most recent global PISA survey out last year, and in a brochure this month called Students, Digital Devices and Success. You can find them both on the OECD website, along with a brand new PISA in Focus report paper, which is out today, entitled Managing Screen Time, How to Protect and Equip Students Against Distraction. So lots of info for you to burrow your eyes into. Now, though, I'm joined by some great guests to discuss these issues. Joining us today, Lotta Edholm, Sweden's Minister for Schools, Dr. Vinod Rao, Secretary of Primary and Secondary Education in the Indian state of Gujarat, and Andreas Schleicher, the OECD's Director for Education and Skills. We will also have video presentations later on from two French government ministers. First up, though, here is the OECD's Andreas Schleicher, who's going to give us an overview of the OECD's findings in this area. Over to you, Andreas.
Thanks so much, Duncan. And the OECD has been tracking the use of technology in school for many years. In fact, this is not a new agenda. It has been with us actually for decades, one can say, if you think, the World Wide Web coming to us in the end of the 90s. But it has really been the pandemic that woke up schools to that digital world that is, changing learning and behavior in radical ways. And then the advent of artificial intelligence, posing entirely new questions and also offering entirely new possibilities. The big promise of technology in education is obviously, a higher degree of personalization. We do often, have very traditional learning settings still, no technology, very little personalization, and we've seen the limits of those learning environments. Now, personalization per se is actually not about technology. If you think, the most effective approach to personalization is tutoring. And that's what, wealthy parents, try to secure for their children. It is proven to be incredibly effective, but it's just very, very hard to scale. And that's, where technology seeks to make a difference. Throwing technology into classrooms doesn't provide any guarantee for success either. We have seen lots of technology in classrooms that has been more about conserving existing practice than to transform it with very limited kind of positive effects. In fact, some of that just making education more expensive, but not necessarily better. The real question is really to what extent education systems can reconfigure the space, the people, the time, the technology, the relationships to generally personalize learning and make learning more interactive, more engaging. Now, while you learn on computer, the computer can now figure out how you study and then make your experience much more interactive. We have seen virtual reality embedding learners in a 3D environment. Why would you listen to your teacher explaining the results of a scientific experiment when you can do that experiment in a virtual laboratory? Lots of possibilities on that. We see augmented reality coming into education, including vocational education and training, students doing things and getting support information through augmented reality environment. And then of course there's classroom analytics. This is not just about students doing things in a technology-enabled environment, but often also teachers getting better insights on how different students learn differently, and then help them learn better, teach better, and so on. Classroom analytics is perhaps the hidden power in the technology-enabled environment. We would often say at the OECD that the best technology is present, but not visible, not distracting students. So that's basically the promise, the rationale behind many of the approaches that we have seen emerging over the last decades and then come to fruition in many education systems. But it is time for a reality check. To what extent has that all worked out, and what have been other kinds of consequences for students, for teachers? And the last PISA round provided an amazing opportunity to find out. It collected data from 690,000 15-year-old students in 81 education systems around the world, looking not just, what they have learned. That's what the PISA test for, testing students and, reading, mathematics and science, creative thinking, things like this, but also collecting lots of data on their exposure to new technologies. And let's start with this. Here in this chart, you can see the hours that students spend on devices learning at school. So that's basically time that is, structured by teachers. You could call it the intentional use of technology in classrooms. But you need to add to that the device use for leisure, where students use their personal smartphones. And as you can see, it's the green bar that is getting pretty long in many education systems. Now, if you contrast that with the time that students spend in regular school hours, you can see that the digital time in many education systems is getting pretty close to actually the time that students spend learning at school, the regular school hours. Now, there are actually a few countries where students spend more time learning online than they do spend in school. One of the examples is Ukraine, but that's, of course, because many schools are still closed because of the war against Ukraine. But in many countries, digital exposure is taking up a significant share of student learning time and student leisure time. And one way you could argue that the digital world has become sort of the real world. Now, the interesting question, of course, is this a good thing, or is this a bad thing? And what we found out is that it actually depends on how technology is being used. Where technology is used intentionally for learning, structured by teachers in the classroom setting, we do not see much of a relationship between the time that students spend on devices and learning outcomes. So you can see that curve is pretty flat, and then goes slightly downwards towards intensive technology use. But it's not much of a relationship. It does vary across countries. This is basically the OECD average picture. But in most countries, you'd see something similar. We cannot say that more intensive technology use in classrooms leads to better outcomes or worse outcomes by teachers. It's pretty neutral. There are some teachers who are very capable of using new technologies, where you can see actually it works really well, and others where that is not the case. But what we see pretty consistently across countries is this, and that is the intensity of smartphone use, where students use their own devices. You can see basically that is steeply negative related to the quality of learning outcomes. Particularly, when students use devices more than an hour, up to 2 hours, more than 2 hours, up to 3 hours, you can see how that, the performance on the PISA tests actually declines. We do not know necessarily what's cause and effect. It could also be that low-performing students, rather spend the time with a smartphone rather than, more smartphone use, driving low performance. There could be other factors at play. This is a correlation that we see, but that association is, pretty consistent across education systems, pretty consistent across geography, pretty consistent across social background. So steeply declining learning outcomes when students use their smartphones very intensively now. So what could be explanations for this? Well, one explanation is pretty intuitive. What we can see is that a good percentage of students say that, in every or in most of their mathematics lessons, they get distracted by using their smartphone or by their classmates using their smartphones. So now basically distraction is an obvious, impediment, something intuitive and something that gets into the way of learning outcomes. we ask ourselves, to what extent can we do something about it? On this chart, you just see, the extent to which distraction rises, the more frequently students use their computers, their smartphones. So you can see basically when they do that in every or almost every lesson, then students get, 1.4 times as much distracted as if they are not. So what can you do about it? Well, what we found is where, teachers negotiated rules with their students that had no visible effect across countries. Where school leaders, pronounced some school policies that had no visible effects across education systems. The only factor that mediated that, problem was a total ban on smartphones. That's the red bar here. Now, when the use of cell phones is not allowed on the school premise, never. Basically, there you can see that distraction, has less of a negative effect on outcomes. There are still some students, bypassing those rules, but overall, you can say a ban on smartphone seems to be one way to mediate that kind of relationship between distraction and outcomes. Whereas, students seem to be pretty good in ignoring or bypassing whatever teachers and school leaders really tell them. So apart from a ban,
Säg att jag är med nu.
Apart from a ban on smartphones, negotiations in schools don't seem to be, having any kind of relationship to those kinds of outcomes. So that's basically the distraction that we can observe. There's another thing that we were quite, struck by. You can see there is a pretty, high share of students who feel nervous, anxious when they don't have their smartphone with them. If you look to Turkey or Malaysia, you can see that is, a good majority of students. But in many countries, it gets, to half of the students. You can call it, some form of addiction. And what our data also show quite clearly is where students do feel nervous when they don't have their smartphone with them, they do a lot less well on mathematics. Once again, it's hard to pin down cause and effect. It could also be that students, who get very anxious, use the smartphone a lot, are not so great in mathematics. That's why they do this. Or it could be, that smartphone use leads to that greater anxiety and drives lower performance. We do not know the causal nature of the relationship, but the association is pretty clearly visible. And it's not the end of the story. What we also found interesting is that students, who felt anxious when they don't have their smartphone with them, they were less happy with their lives. They felt less in control of their emotions. They were, felt less resistant against stress, less resilience. So it's not just, lower cognitive outcomes. There's a whole range of social and emotional outcomes that we can also clearly see associated with that nervousness of not having your smartphone near you. These are the findings. This is the reality check that, PISA provides for that question of whether, technology is a positive or, a distracting negative force on student learning outcomes and well-being. One of the things that the OECD has done recently, is provide some guidelines for public policy to help them ensure that we use technology, that we harness the potential of it, but also are quite clearly aware of the, consequences it can have if used in an unstructured way. I want to leave you with one last thought. Often we assume that, to become digitally literate, you need to use a lot of technology. Is the kind of intuitive conclusion that we draw. You want to be digitally literate, you have to, get used to technology and use technology a lot. But actually, when we tested that in PISA, we found something really different. The best predictor of digital literacy was actually the frequency with which students read books in paper format, long texts. Whereas students using books or material more on digital devices tended to be actually less proficient digital readers. Seems counterintuitive, but only up to an extent. if you want to become digitally literate, you need to enter into complex arguments. You need to be able to deal with contrasting, conflicting opinions. You need to distinguish fact from opinion, and all, those kinds of skills you develop when you engage with long, complex text rather than with, a TikTok video or a small snippet of text. And the same message emerged when we looked at, the length of books. The best predictor of digital literacy was actually the reading of books of more than 100 pages. So again, engaging with complex arguments, taking the time to read something through rather than just, navigate from page to page. So I'll leave you with that thought. That's not something that we cover sort of so much in this report. This report was more about, the effects of technology on cognitive and social emotional outcomes. But I do believe it's also an interesting facet that we perhaps all together need to think harder. How do we prepare young people best for this digital world of tomorrow? Thank you, Duncan.
Thank you so much for that presentation, Andreas. We will get the debate underway in a moment. Before we do, just to let you know, you can contribute to the chat, which many of you already are. Just please do send in your messages. Any questions and comments, please be clear and concise. There is one here from Devereaux Cohen, who says, I think banning smartphones is not the solution. I think the solution is having enough digital devices in schools that teachers will be able to use for using digital technology. So do please keep those comments coming. Now, though, let's hear from our first French guest. Interpretation is available to anyone who would like to listen to the video in English. Please select the interpretation option at the bottom of your screens. Languages at the bottom of your screen, and select listen in English on the menu. While you struggle searching your buttons on the Zoom feed, here are some of the recorded remarks from Nicole Bellomet, France's Minister of National Education and Young People.
Je suis heureuse de pouvoir m'exprimer aujourd'hui à l'occasion du webinaire qui est organisé pour la publication des travaux de l'OCDE sur le lien entre les usages des écrans et la performance scolaire. Et je regrette vraiment de ne pas pouvoir participer directement à vos échanges tant ils seront, je n'en doute pas, constructifs. Vous le savez, mesdames et messieurs, le président de la République française a souhaité installer mi-janvier
French Republic decided in mid-January to establish a commission made up of experts from civil society that was tasked with evaluating the effects of screen exposure on children and the effectiveness of the measures already in place, and also to issue new recommendations. The report summarizing the work of this commission was submitted to the President on the 30th of April this year. After 3 months of work, the members of the commission became convinced that the issue of the use of digital devices should not overshadow a wider and necessary discussion around the place and needs of children in our society and on the training of students by and for the digital space. In the summary report produced by the OECD entitled Students' Digital Devices and Success, you compiled the most recent data on the effects of digital devices, which was convergent and complementary, and you present an insightful analysis. There is consensus, a very clear consensus on the direct and not so direct effects of digital devices on sleep and on health and various pathologies. The conditions for the use of digital devices that will lead to positive outcomes are also pointed out in the report. Television, video games, and other touchscreens can be a great opportunity if correctly used to develop attention and cognitive skills during all phases of life and at all ages, and also to acquire skills amongst young children and young adolescents. I would also mention the opinion of the Scientific Council on National Education, the CSEN, on the usefulness of touch screens as an aid to learning to write. They allow for the correction of mistakes in real time for each individual student. These tools can also be extremely useful to help with learning to read for children with dyslexia, who, thanks to the EdTech software, which is adapted to their reading difficulties, can learn to read better. For a majority of students, close to 60% of them, digital devices in class or during school activities are a source of distraction. The OECD study sheds light on the negative relationship between excessive use of digital devices and students' academic results. The hours that a young person spends in front of a screen every day in school or outside of school are hours that they do not spend doing other things that can engender positive cognitive or physical effects, such as interacting with friends or family, for example, reading, doing homework or sports, or even just sleeping. The data presented for France is extremely enlightening, but also sometimes beyond worrisome. For example, less than 10% of young girls get enough physical exercise. The idea is not to be against the use of screens, but to work to fight addiction to them. I am very conscious of the fact that schools cannot do everything. Our schools spend 15% of their time in schools, but schools can send out a message that encourages using digital devices in a reasonable manner, especially smartphones. I would now like to talk to you about the banning of smart schools in schools, which was enshrined in the law of the 3rd of August 2008 on the regulation of the use of mobile phones in educational institutions. The data presented by the OECD shows that banning schools, if it is only partially enforced, does not allow for the removal of the risk of distraction due to digital devices. This is why I would like to put in place a real digital pause for all primary and middle school students. I would like for there be experimentation with a significant number of middle schools and in concert with the local governments they are affiliated with, of technical or organizational measures that would allow for the setting aside of smartphones throughout the school day. And I also would like there to be innovative ideas implemented, such as a month without apps, for example, in some schools. On the 30th of April last, the President of the Republic asked each of the ministers involved with this issue to evaluate the recommendations presented by the experts and to propose by the end of May a number of measures for implementation. In the field of education, we are exploring a number of ideas. Initial and continuous training for teachers with certification of their skills. Identify the equipment and uses of digital devices with updated list of the needed equipment and with adjustments for primary schools. And we are discussing this with local governments. The access to digital tools which are adapted for students with special educational needs, with students who are outside of school or whose education has been interrupted. The definition and application of strict frameworks for the use of digital learning environments and smartphones, the training of students in digital skills, the putting in place of a strategy on artificial intelligence for schools, the promotion of health and transversal education, the fight against violence in the digital environment by ensuring the checking of age on social media platforms,
And talking about good digital behaviors for students to achieve success in our interactions with parents. The educational, health, and social stakes are high, and we are engaging with energy and determination in cooperation with teachers, local governments, and also our partners in the edtech and digital environments. The movement has started in France, like in other OECD countries. I would like to thank you for the work that you have done, and I would like to say that I was pleased to a participant, even remotely, in this event, and I wish you fruitful exchanges. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those recorded remarks, and thank you to the interpretation. You can stay with that interpretation function at the bottom of your screens, because I'm glad to say we're joined by another French government minister in another video, pre-recorded remarks. Here is Sarah El Airi, the French Minister Delegate for Children, Youth and Families.
Ladies and gentlemen, public policy should be knowledge-based. This guarantees both its relevance and its effectiveness. In this regard, I am greatly attached to the work of the OECD. The impact of digital devices on children and young people is a subject of great importance for the future of our country. The report that was published recently, based on the data of the 2022 edition of the Program for the International Student Assessment, PISA, highlights the complex relationship between students' screen use and their academic performance, but also the effects of screens on their well-being and inequalities between young people. Let's start with their well-being. The report shows that 43% of French students say that they feel nervous or anxious when their phones are not nearby. Their digital environment offers children learning opportunities, but also carries dangers, such as cyber harassment, exposure to inappropriate content, and problems relating to the protection of their private lives. Another of the effects of screen exposure on children is the widening of the digital divide between children who have screens available to them and those who don't, firstly, but especially the divide between children who receive guidance from their parents on screen use and those who don't. It is therefore crucial to consider the growing digital divide in terms of digital access and digital skills, which greatly harms many categories of the population throughout the world, such as girls and underprivileged children. In the face of this, the French government has taken action. The law, promulgated on October 20th, 2020, regulates the commercial use of images of children under the age of 16 on internet platforms to protect them and their privacy. At the initiative of the Member of Parliament Laurent Marcangeli, the law of the 7th of July 2023 establishes legal adulthood in the digital space at 15. President Macron would like to extend this to all of Europe. In mid-2024, the President created a commission that is made up of experts from civil society to evaluate the risks of the exposure of children to screens and to issue a number of recommendations. At the end of its work, the Commission issued a number of important conclusions that are perfectly in line with those of the OECD. First of all, there is clear scientific consensus as to the harmful consequences of digital devices on many aspects of child and adolescent health. In particular, using screens contributes to lack of sleep, leading a sedentary lifestyle, lack of physical exercises, vision problems, and also obesity and all the chronic pathologies emanating from obesity. Starting in 2017, France began implementing programs to raise the awareness of parents as to the new dangers their children encounter in the digital space. This is an issue I wholeheartedly took on when I arrived at the ministry, and I continue to do so. We must continue this awareness raising, and we must develop advice and tools to help parents protect their children effectively. The brand Parents Let's Talk Digital and the website associated with it are concrete examples of the work we are doing to provide usable, clear, and trustworthy solutions for parents in order to support them in every stage of parenting. The OECD is a valuable wake-up call that should incite us to act with determination on the basis of scientific work. France is firmly committed to this path with concrete measures to protect our children from the excesses of the digital spaces while fully taking advantage of the opportunities they present. The OECD should also allow the member states to identify good practices to fight these excesses more rapidly and effectively. Together, we need to continue to search for a balance so that the digital environment remain a means to achieve progress and not an obstacle to the personal fulfillment of their youth. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much and see you soon.
Thank you again for those video remarks, and thank you to the interpretation team. Interesting to hear the perspective of two leading French politicians. Now, though, let's turn to Sweden and hear their perspective on the matter. All the panelists, in fact, can turn on their cameras now. Let's get into the debate. Lotta Edholm, Sweden's Minister for Schools, is joining us live. Thank you so much for joining us, Lotta. Sweden has previously taken a highly digitized approach to education, but you're changing that. Tell us about what's happening in Sweden.
Thank you very much for letting me say a few words in this very important report. The report contains many important conclusions that in many ways confirms my previous beliefs that students' use of screens in school must be limited. The use of screens in school is an issue with many different dimensions. It both concerns the misuse of digital tools provided by the school, but of course it also concerns students' distracting use of their private phones during classes and breaks in school. As Sweden is one of the most digitalized countries in the world, I would like to share our experience on the use of digital devices in schools. We have found that while technology creates new possibilities, the potential risks of wrongfully using digital devices in teaching should not be overlooked. Improperly using digital devices in teaching or having an uncritical approach to digitalization can lead to a weakening in teaching and consequently a lower percentage of students reaching the goals. There is an ongoing debate in Sweden concerning how students' cognitive development is affected by using digital learning. Studies have shown that basic skills in reading and writing is best developed by using physical books and writing with pen and paper. That students are able to read and understand what they are reading is the foundation for all learning in all subjects in schools. Reading skills also make students able to acquire the necessary knowledge and information needed to navigate in the world today. To experience the joy of reading is also an important part of children's development that should not be overlooked or underestimated. In Sweden, we are therefore now focusing on schools going back to the basics, and the Swedish government has begun working with introducing more analog learning aids in schools in a range of different ways. Amongst the other things, investments have been made to increase the number of textbooks in school and reduce the time spent in front of a screen. Today, we see many schools lack the appropriate textbooks, and the government has therefore made a clarification in the Education Act to make sure that students have access to textbooks. We're also making a push for school libraries. School librarians and school libraries play an important role in promoting students' interest in reading. The government will therefore make investments to make sure that all students have access to staff school libraries. We believe that digital learning aids should be introduced in teaching when students are of an age where it will promote and not impede on their learning. Today, the curriculum for preschools includes that preschool teachers should make sure that all children are able to use digital aids. The curriculum for preschools is now being renewed. We want to remove the requirement for digital learning aids to be used in preschools. The use of digital learning aids should instead take place in selective cases and based on scientific support and education added value. In the report, the question of banning phones in school is discussed. I believe having a school environment free from phones is the right way to go, and we are currently implementing this in Sweden. It is time to make the norm that all schools should be free from phones throughout the school day. At the same time, students also need to become better at handling the use of screens outside the school environment. Much like in the report, we see many teenagers do not get enough sleep and because they are using their phones late at night. The lack of physical activity is also a very important issue to raise, and it's very positive that the report includes data on students' lack of physical activity. To summarize, I want to see more students studying in front of textbooks instead in front of a screen in the future. I look forward to this discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for your thoughts there. Let's get a completely different perspective and go to India's northwest coast, where we're joined by Dr. Vinod Rao, Gujarat Secretary of Primary and Secondary Education. Thank you so much for joining us. You face your own challenges, of course, in promoting equitable quality education to all. How do you view digital devices and smartphones in terms of their use and benefits at schools?
Thank you. Good afternoon. Our experience has been that what 2 decades of digital revolution could not achieve, 2 years of COVID pandemic helped achieve. Online, digital, and blended learning today is a new normal in India. Just a few years back, when we discuss about online and blended learning, many concerns were raised by educationalists. Today, after the pandemic and the experiences we went through, there is no longer a question whether online blended learning with the help of learning devices and edtech is helpful or not. The only question is how to optimize the usage and minimize whatever is the collateral damage of it. In just last 3-4 years, there has been exponential increase in the usage of technology and devices across the country. Today, devices and technology has helped in democratization of education. We cannot make every teacher outstanding, but we can certainly make one outstanding teacher made available to all the students. And this is where technology and devices come handy. The question whether devices should be used or not is not valid in a context like that of India. What is valid is how can we make the negative impact of it nullified. In Gujarat, we follow the same model which has been talked about by my predecessors. We ban individual mobile phones from school campuses. Not only students, even teachers are not supposed to use mobile inside the school. But there is something that has opened up opportunity like never before, and that is individual devices versus collective devices. In Gujarat, we have 20,000 schools with computer labs which has been created in the last 6 months. We have 100,000 smart classrooms which has been prepared in the last 1 year. All this thanks to technology and blended learning revolution that has been triggered by pandemic. Instead of individual devices to be used by students, we have created pool of devices commonly shared across all the students. So be it smart classrooms, be it computer labs, be it STEM labs, these are technology assisted devices and commonly shared infrastructure, which helps in overall teaching and learning experience of the student. Devices and technology has certainly improved overall learning outcomes in schools, whether it is through technology assisted teaching and learning, technology assisted assessments, which helps in getting real-time feedback of the assessments, helping in remedial through personalized adaptive learning, each child assisted in learning according to their strengths and weaknesses, usage of bots, reading fluency apps, and above all, we have QR coded our textbooks, and students can use their devices beyond the school time. Even at their home, they can use their individual devices beyond the school hours, go to textbooks, use the QR coding, and get all relevant learning content available in public domain pertaining to that learning outcome, pertaining to that subject. So this has really helped in exponentially increasing the teaching learning experience of the student. Teaching and learning has become more engaging and more interesting to the student. But we are also focusing on other aspect, altogether another aspect of technology assisted improvement in education, and that is role of devices and technology in improving governance in education. Be it increasing the enrollment, tracking students who are outside the schooling system, getting them onboarded, ensuring regular attendance of children, identifying children who are not regularly attending the school and reaching out to them, their parents, getting them back to school, tracking our entire school machinery, be it online attendance of teachers or online attendance of other supervisory staff related to education, entire reporting system made online through digital devices and software, and above all, having a centralized system for command and control at the state level, which incidentally is called Vidya Samiksha Kendra and has been recognized by the World Bank as a global best practice recently. Command and Control Center for Schools is a technology assisted mechanism to have real-time online monitoring of all 55,000 schools in the state, which has 12 million students and 400,000 teachers. Such a massive machinery cannot be monitored except through the use of devices and technology cutting across all levels, from the school level to the cluster level to the district level, state level. This mechanism of online real-time monitoring has helped in significantly improving overall learning outcomes across all the schools in the state. OECD has rightly found that while we have converted pandemic, the adversity of pandemic into an advantage of making technology assisted teaching and learning normal. However, in that opportunity also there is an adversity, and when devices and technology is misused or abused, that opens up scope for great threat. Yes, some kind of caution, some kind of care and concern has to be taken while using these devices, and therefore going for collective devices instead of individual devices in schools will help in minimizing this threat. With these opening remarks, I pass on the.
Thank you so much for those opening remarks, Secretary Rao. Let's bring in the OECD's Andreas Schleicher again, because we heard two very different perspectives there, Andreas. Is there a particular way that high-performing countries perform this issue regarding digital device use in schools?
It's very difficult to say. I think there are clearly countries in which technology use or the integration of technologies has been taken very far. If you look to education systems like Korea, the digital textbooks, if you look to Singapore, I think it's been a lot of effort. But I would still say those education systems also have been very cautious with screen time. And I do think that is really what this balance is about, that on the one hand, we harness the potential of new technologies, and I think the example of Gujarat is actually quite impressive on this as well. And while at the same time being very conscious and aware of the potential negative effects that screen times have on cognitive outcomes and social and emotional well-being. To me, it's no surprise that a country like Sweden, that went very enthusiastically, very, very far on that digital frontier, is now also the first seeing the reality that this has brought with its heads and tries to sort of pursue an adjustment. And I do think it is really about finding an appropriate balance. It's not just a story of high-performing education systems. Yes, some are very conscious users of technology, but others actually are also very much aware of using learning analytics and data systems to support education while still minimizing screen time and fostering learning often in quite traditional ways.
Thank you for those remarks, Andreas. Lotte Edholm, Sweden's Minister for Schools. Let's go back to you. The OECD's own research is predicting that up to around a quarter of jobs could be easily automated in the coming years due to AI. And AI, of course, is predicted to change radically the jobs market. What do you say to those who argue that more time should be devoted to learning how to do online research, to learning how to use digital devices, to learning how to understand technologies?
I think they are wrong because you need to learn how to read and write properly, and you need to use this digitalization with concerning the age of the children. You first have to learn how to read and write, and then you can use computers, screens, and so on. And I think one problem in Sweden is that we start too early introducing screens, and we see all those negative effects. I think you have to understand that Sweden is a very, very digitalized country, and we use screens for so much things. And young children, they spend so much time in front of screens. And we also know if, for instance, we have a mobile-free school, children that are going to a total mobile-free school, they also use the mobile phone less at home. And of course, that is a good thing, because I'm very, very concerned about the negative effects on using screens. For instance, when it comes to sleep is one really, it's very important for young children to sleep enough. So I think you should use and introduce digital tools when they have the right age, not too early. But of course, this is not only a problem for the school system. This is also something for parents to be aware of, just as one of the French ministers said. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Secretary Rao, let's go back to you. What's your perspective on what was just said there? Is the same happening in Gujarat, or are you taking a different policy approach?
We believe that technology is the way forward for a country with the diversity and the complexity of India. The challenges faced by a country like India is altogether different, and we have to see it in that context and in that perspective. Today, the biggest challenge faced by developing world is that of learning poverty. Learning poverty consists of two components. One, students who are not coming to school, and second, students who are coming to school and still not learning as per what they should be learning. Now, to bridge both these gaps in a country so geographically vast with so much of complexities, the biggest game changer will be technology. So, in an ecosystem where every stakeholder is heavily militantly unionized, to make reforms in terms of teachers reforms or in terms of school management reforms will be very challenging. The only stakeholder who is not unionized in the whole system is the student. And hence, any pro-student initiative will be very difficult to implement in a system where every other stakeholder is unionized. So we have found that technology is the way forward. We need to increasingly rely on smart classrooms. We have to increasingly rely on blended learning, where part of the learning happens at home. QR-coded textbooks help in that. We also are relying on TV channels, dedicated TV channels at the national level, where every grade has their syllabus happening, teaching activity happening on a daily basis through TV channels. So this way, blended learning will help in overcoming the asymmetry in the quality of teaching that is happening in schools.
Thank you so much for that.
Can't make every
time.
Yes.
We're down to almost the last 5 minutes, I'm afraid, and just to try to get through a few more questions with the other people on the panel as well. Thank you for the questions coming in. Vanessa Narrow, for example, says the use of digital devices by the teacher when at school can always be a great help, but this does not necessarily mean the students need to use their phones at school. And Lois N. Gap has sent in a question talking about questioning whether or not the use of phones and other digital devices at schools, do they not perpetuate the digital divide? I wonder if I can hand that question over to Andreas.
Yeah, I think the digital divide is another dimension here, but I think that the distinction that has been drawn here between teachers' intentional use of technology and students' exposure to screens is a quite important one. And that is exactly the distinction that actually play out in our data. We cannot see, and I think that's also reconciles the perspective that we can see here from India and Sweden. I think India very much talks about introducing technology in support of the education system and teachers to make education more accessible, whereas I think the effects that we highlight in our study are really the individual use of technology by students, the exposure to screens, the kind of anxiety and fear that comes with this. But also, and I think Minister Edholm made that point in really important ways, that many of the 21st century skills we learn by a deep engagement with material, including printed material, where we have to, engage with complex arguments. Learning is never a transactional business. It's always a social, relational experience, and the role of educators is of key importance here. And again, teachers can harness technology in many different ways. The question really is about to what extent do we leave students with their own devices.
Thank you, Andreas, and thank you again for the questions coming in. Minister Edholm, I don't know if you'll be able to answer this, but I will ask you because a question has come in from Richard Walls, who asks, regarding Sweden, what evidence is there that reduced use of digital devices at school reduces the use of digital devices at home?
I'm not sure I got that question right, but there is evidence, I would say, that, for instance, if small children should learn how to read and write, there is evidence that textbooks is a better way of doing it because they can read, for instance, longer text compared to a screen, and their deep reading is better when using books instead of screens. So I think there is quite a lot of evidence right now concerning this.
Thank you for that. And Secretary Rao, if I can just come back to you, we really are in our last moments here, but if you have any final thoughts which you would like to share with those viewing the webinar.
Well, when computers came 30, 40 years back, people had concern whether we will be thrown out of job market. Today, technology-assisted education would also have many skeptics raising their voice. However, technology is the only way forward for improving access, equity, quality, and governance in education. Technology is the only solution to improve overall education ecosystem across the globe.
Thank you for that. And Andreas Schleicher from the OECD, if you'd like to give some final thoughts.
Well, you know, I think what all of these data and all of these perspectives really highlighted, this is a field that we need to study in much more careful and cautious ways than we have done in the past. You know, when it comes to medical technology, we're actually extremely cautious. You know, we experiment with this. We ensure that before we introduce such technologies, the beneficial effects are you know, superior to any potential harmful effects. And I do believe it is time for us to take a more deliberate, more intentional approach when it comes to technology. On the one hand, harnessing the benefits technology can have, while also being very cautious about, you know, the kind of potential side effects as that we have. We have sort of, you know, countries on both sides of those spectrum, and I do think that this is where international dialogue and collaboration can be extremely helpful. I think we can learn a lot from and with each other. I was just, you know, actually together with Minister Edholm at the International Summit of the Teaching Profession, where we had actually a quite nuanced exchange about those different experiences. And I do believe this is a learning exercise, and we need, the technology is evolving at an extremely rapid speed. So I think we should, you know, redouble our efforts to ensure that we serve children at all ages best, and also understand that children at different ages may have different needs and concerns.
Thank you so much for that, and to all our guests for their contributions today. That is unfortunately all we have time for. If you want to learn more about what we have been discussing, I did mention it right at the start of the webinar, there is a brand new PISA in Focus paper out called Managing Screen Time, How to Protect and Equip Students Against Distraction. Do go online and check that out. Thank you very much to Sweden's Minister for Schools, Lotta Edholm, Dr. Vinod Rao, Secretary of Primary and Secondary Education in Gujarat, Nicole Belloubet, France's Minister of National Education and Young People, and Sarah El Iri, the French Minister Delegate for Children, Youth and Schools, and of course our very own OECD's Andreas Schleicher. That's it from us. Thank you to the production team and to the interpreters and to all of you who joined the webinar today. We hope to see you again soon. All the best.